All right, guys, welcome back to the podcast. Today, we've got another guest. We're talking to Jack today. Jack, do you want to introduce yourself? Tell everyone kind of like about what you got going on and just give us a lowdown on who you are, who we're talking with.
Sure. Yeah. Glad to be on. Excited to talk to you in person for not necessarily in person, but face to face for the first time. Mostly through Instagram DMs, but yeah, I'm a full-time one-on-one remote CrossFit performance coach. So I've been coaching for coming up on a little bit over 4 years. Started honestly just coaching general fitness and coaching some people at the gym I was going to. Honestly, my background is, I got into CrossFit, wanted to be competitive, and hired a coach immediately and looked around, saw how much better I was getting with the training I was doing, and I was like, everyone should be doing this, right? Or everyone should know about this. And from there, asked my coach to mentor me and just started trying to coach people for free and, get experience, get some social proof. And yeah, about 8 months ago, was able to go full-time. So full-time online now, which is athletes pretty much all over the U.S. I think like 13 or 14 different states and one in Canada. So trying to go international now. But yeah, that's all about me. I'm in Jacksonville, Florida as well.
Nice. That's interesting that you went straight to just getting a coach. So what prompted that? I think usually the life cycle of somebody who starts doing CrossFit, they go to an affiliate, they do classes, and then they kind of like will do it until they feel like they're stalling out, and then they go to a competitor program that's like 30-50 bucks a month. They'll do that until they stall out, and then they hire a coach. So what was your reason for kind of going right to the coach without taking all those steps?
Yeah, good question. So I played college basketball, and I think, I when I was like reminiscing on my career as a basketball player, the one thing that I wish I did differently was getting started sooner in the weight room, getting started sooner on sport-specific training. I knew some things. I knew, your basics, your dumbbell bench press, your squat, your deadlift, but I didn't necessarily know how to transfer that to the sport of basketball. So when I got to college, it was very clear I was a step behind as far as not only height and speed, but strength as well. And, I ended up having a good career. I battled through some of the adversity, but, that was one thing where I was like, if I could have done this differently, I would have gotten involved in that much sooner. And so when I started CrossFit, I knew it was something I wanted to do, something that I wanted to be good at. And, I pretty much told myself I want to do this the right way and I want to go all in. And, so I don't think it was necessarily me going, I need to hire a coach. It was more so me seeing, my coach online and how he was helping people and being enticed by that, which led me to reach out. But yeah, that was, almost 5 years ago. Been with him ever since. And, so yeah, it was more so just seeing what I did develop like basketball wise and wanting to do it differently with CrossFit. I will say there was a little bit of a plateau, like with my strength. I started to lose a lot of strength, which is funny, we're talking about what we're talking about today, but yeah. I started doing a CrossFit class, maybe like 2 months, 3 months, and started losing a lot of the strength that I had built up through like just more bodybuilding type. And, and yeah, I was like, I need to do something different. So.
Nice. Yeah, that sounds like almost like your experience as a competitive athlete in the past maybe gave you some like some foresight that, hey, if I want to do this and like kind of be competitive with this or take this seriously, that's going to take that extra step of hiring a coach, which I think is something that a lot of people miss. Like I think in general, people get into doing classes and stuff and they don't they want to do it seriously or whatever, but they just don't know that that's even an option for them. It takes a lot of like plateauing and frustration before they reach the point where they're ready to hire an individual coach. And I also think that having that competitive background, you've like been through it before, you kind of know the sacrifices and stuff that it takes, and it's like, I'll just skip all the shit that's gonna like bog me down and go right direct to the source, basically.
Yeah, I do
So
think there's definitely value in doing CrossFit, right? There's a lot of value in experience in the sport, learning how to compete, learning how to hurt, learning how to push yourself. But I also think there's a lot of value in learning how to train by yourself and, follow structure and follow a program. So, would I argue that someone, fresh into the sport just needs to hire a coach right away? I probably wouldn't necessarily argue that. I would more so say, get into the sport, make sure it's something that you want to be doing, make sure it's something you're passionate about, get some experience under your belt. But I do think for athletes like myself who are transitioning from another sport, we see a lot of people from, Olympic weightlifting backgrounds or gymnastics backgrounds or track and field. They already have a lot of athleticism and, somewhat training age built up. And, so it could be a natural transition straight into, working one-on-one.
yeah, and those individuals already have, which I think is kind of what I was trying to drive this point home, is like, yourself included, they already have the regimented like structure. They're already pretty dedicated and okay with kind of the commitment that it takes to be a more competitive athlete. And so if they see it and they're like, I want to do this, that's like kind of the way that they have always experienced sport and training, is like following a plan, having a coach, and kind of like driving for that extra inch every day in the gym. Whereas like, I would agree at Gen Pop, if they're like, I want to get into this, I want to try this out, doing CrossFit classes is super valuable. I mean, especially if they have very little training age, the lack of specificity can be really helpful for just learning new movements and stuff. And then having a coach in person, unless they're really bad, is probably still better than having a remote coach for individuals who need to learn how to just move well. I would say that our job is a lot easier when the client already has like generally good movement mechanics, at least in like the foundational patterns of like squatting and hinging, and pressing and pulling. But like, if someone's never done that stuff before, they're going to get from point A to point B a lot faster with someone who can cue them in person than like having to wait for the feedback online. So I think that's where the argument for like doing CrossFit classes, especially for like a newer athlete, really kind of like shines through. But
yeah, that is acknowledging that they are at a gym with good coaching, and which is not always the case.
Yeah, you have to take that with a grain of salt, because it's also very easy to become a CrossFit coach. You don't actually have to be that good at coaching to get in level one. So
would you say most of the people that you coach online, for example, are people that have plateaued in the sport and are looking for more? Or would you say, just from my experience, I would say it's 50-50. I think there's a lot of people that I just honestly talked into it. As far as, rate of adaptation, it's like, yeah, you may be making progress, but how quickly can you make the progress? We've got a teenager standing on the podium at the CrossFit Games. So it's like we're the first generation, I feel like, where people have been doing this for almost their entire lives.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think a couple of my athletes are people that I were doing classes at my gym, and I identified that they were always looking for a little bit more. They were eager to compete, and I went and said, hey, like, you want to do this one-on-one thing. You're gonna have to take a step back from doing the classes and work out by yourself a lot. But if that's a journey you're willing to take, then I think that we can, you can have a lot of success in the sport. People who are reaching out to me on Instagram, a lot of times it's not necessarily they've hit a plateau. Maybe it is, but it's more like they aren't getting the rate of adaptation that they're maybe expecting, or they're just looking for a little bit more structure and almost like a justification behind the programming. I think it can be challenging for athletes who are looking for a lot of adaptation, and they're dedicating a lot of their time and energy to the sport, to follow a program that's written for a kind of like larger subset of people, sure. Whether it's like a competitor program or Anything that you can just subscribe to online for $30 to $50 a month. And they kind of are like, I just feel like if I was doing stuff slightly different, because this isn't really working for me, like it's working, it's casting a wide net, it's gonna drive the needle a little bit, but I feel like if I optimized for myself specifically, I could really kind of hammer home that progress. Those are kind of the themes that I'm noticing when people reach out to me. So yeah, like it's not like people are hitting a wall and then they're like, okay, now I turn to you and I need help. It's more like, I'm just curious. I think that I can take this a little bit further. I think like I'm ready to make sure I haven't left any stone unturned. And I'm going to ask you for help with that, is kind of more the vibe that I get from the clients that I work with and that are reaching out to me, at least currently.
Yeah. I think it's honestly a little bit of a mistake to wait until you plateau. And obviously it's hard to predict when that is necessarily, but from a mental perspective, a plateau is hard to get through, right? And so waiting until you plateau, I feel like there's a better alternative, which is like, hey, recognize that things are slowing down a little bit for you, maybe not coming to a full halt, and then start looking for, supplemental options or additional options. I think people do, like I've heard people say in the past, like, keep doing it until it stops working. But, with the sport, we don't get to do this for a super long time. This is hard on our bodies. It's financially expensive. It's, it takes a lot of time. And so people, I don't know the exact figure on this, but people have a shorter runway of time where they're like, I'm going to dedicate a lot to this. And when I first started, my mantra was always like, get the results that you deserve from the work you're putting in. Because I've been that person who was in the gym, that was working out, was consistent, was going every day, but I just wasn't doing the right things. And so I wasn't seeing progress. Didn't know what progressive overload was. Didn't know, how to eat properly. And so that was a big mantra for mine coming in. So it's like, why are you going to go and do 2, 3, 4 hours of training when 90% of it may just be junk volume, and you're not actually getting much out of what you're doing?
Yeah, I just made a post about this. It's like and I've heard other coaches talk about this before also. For CrossFitters, like the sport that they're selecting is so unrewarding. like it's a lot of work. It's a lot of like really grueling work, and it's really, really hard to get to the pinnacle of the sport and get any recognition for the hard work that you're putting in. And so people are doing it because they love training, and they like working hard, and it's going to naturally select for those types of people. I think where a lot of the coaching comes in is like helping those athletes direct their effort towards the right things, because it is very uncommon that it would be like a lack of effort or a lack of will to see progress, to put the work in. It's usually just an unfocused, it's a little bit chaotic, like almost what you're describing. Like you go and you're like, I'm just going to grind for 4 hours. And some of that, I think, honestly was perpetuated by like the earlier days of CrossFit. Like you got like clips of Matt where he's like, I just bought a pig and did 500 pig flips, and like that's how I won the games. And it's like, yeah, dude, but like Matt's a fucking freak, dude. Like that guy's insane. And it can work for some people. Like I'm not saying that doesn't work, but the effort needs to be like directed specific to the individual. And you need to be like working on things that are gonna push the needle forward for you, not just throwing volume at your body and hoping that you survive, right? Like, and the thing is, like the CrossFit people who want to be competitive in the sport will do it because they like hard work and they like the grueling aspect of it. But it's the when the coach comes in, it's like, let's take that energy and let's put it towards something that's going to be more valuable. It's going to push the needle faster. You're going to get better adaptation if we do this work and we direct our energy this way instead of into all these other avenues.
Yeah, it's a simple example, and honestly, when I'm on a discovery call, this is what I bring up. It's like, hey, what do you perceive to be your biggest limiter as far as movements go? And for a lot of females in the sport, they'll mention something about upper body gymnastics or gymnastics capacity. ring muscle ups, butterfly pull ups, butterfly chest to bar. And so I'll reframe the question back on them. It's like, okay, on your current programming, how often are you doing those things? And the answer is usually maybe 2-3 times a month. I'm like, well, what if you did those things 2 or 3 times a week?
Yeah.
How much quicker? That's a 400%. I think that's the right math. Like 400% increase on how many, how often you're touching that thing. As we know, in strength training in particular, frequency is a big part of it. So it's like, why aren't we doing that with skill acquisition as well?
Right.
And really, the only way you can do that is by doing your own thing.
Yeah.
So
okay. Well, the other day Jack posted something on Instagram. He posted a little sticker on his story, and he was like, "Is CrossFit primarily
rage bait?"
Rage bait. Yeah, he was like, "Is CrossFit a strength or endurance sport?" And when I answered it, I clicked strength, and I was shocked by the result, because it shows you the results after, and I was like, man, there's a lot of people picking endurance. It's a weird, seemed like a weird amount of people that picked endurance. And Jack and I went back and forth in the DMs. We're like, is it a strength? Is it an endurance sport? And we're kind of offering some different examples. And I was like, this conversation seems pretty valuable. I think that it was there was some good stuff being said on both sides. I was like, why don't you just come on the podcast? We'll talk about it and face to face, and kind of go over what the reasons are that it might be a strength sport, or why it might be an endurance sport. I've been thinking about it for because this was about a week ago. I've been thinking about it for the past week. The things that I want to make sure that we're holding on to as we kind of hash this out is that we're talking, I would say, about like an upper quarterfinals level athlete up through games level. I want to stay away, and I did this when I talked to Peter about nutrition. In general, stay away from like the Gen Pop stuff, because that's a totally different monster that we can talk about a different day. But I think really both of us are working to serve more competitive athletes, and ones that are probably going to do decently in quarterfinals, and then are either bubble athletes going into semifinals, or even maybe have games aspirations. So we'll talk about them more specifically when we're framing kind of how we're having this discussion. Other than that, I think that kind of the floor is open, and I would say,
like to add, to set the tone, neither of us are saying that strength or endurance is not necessary for the sport.
It should be very obvious that you need both. Like it should be very obvious it's not a marathon, and it's also not shot put. Like it's somewhere in between.
I could just see us getting clipped and be like, these nerds on here talking about strength and endurance, but yeah, no, totally agree with that.
So since we talked, I've been thinking about it, and I think as our reference points for kind of how I've been thinking about it, how I've been comparing it to other sports that exist. When we talk about like a more strength and power athlete, or a strength sport athlete, I'm thinking things like Olympic weightlifting, shot put, discus, javelin, like really, really powerful sports that involve rapid rate of force production and very, very little actual working time. I guess is the way I would quantify that. And then when we're talking about a pure endurance athlete, I'm going to leave ultramarathon stuff off of the table for this. I would say that the marathon is about as far out as we'll go on the endurance spectrum as it relates to CrossFit, I would say, because it's not unreasonable that we would see, and in fact we have seen an event that lasts 3.5 to 4 hours. It was rowing, but there are longer events in that kind of long time domain, and then there are also max lift attempts. So like working within that framework, I would say those are kind of our two ends of the spectrum on whether or not and I think the discussion that we're about to have is we're trying to figure out where the sport of fitness falls within that spectrum. And Is it leaning more on the endurance? Is it leaning more on the strength? And how can we kind of like wrap our heads around that?
For sure. Yeah, definitely. I think I'll start just with what would be, I guess, my first argument. And I guess for context, in the DMs, I was basically defending that CrossFit does lean more towards an endurance sport, while Spencer was leaning more towards a strength sport. And at the end of this, we probably will not come to, an agreement, and that's good, because it really is, it's very dependent on the person, as well as, it's just very dependent on people's training and what they need to work on as well. So, the first thing I'll say is, when you look at, because you brought up strength sports, right? So when you look at the primary determinants of a strength sport, okay, you think about Olympic weightlifting, you think about javelin, shot put, those things you were mentioning. These are going to be very short efforts, right? 1 RM type efforts, where it is 100%, rate of force development, recruiting 100% motor unit recruitment, and just, going all out on every single effort. The determinant of like a CrossFit or an endurance sport rather would be ability to sustain power over time, or ability to sustain effort over time. So when you just look at the sport holistically, and this is just a super high level, what do you see more of? And in my eyes, that is that mixed modal sustainability of power over time versus those quick bursts of force development and, expressing raw strength or power.
Yep. And when it's framed that way, I do tend to agree. I think that when you break it down that way, 100%, because most CrossFit events or functional fitness events require some semblance of pacing and sustaining work rate, sustaining power output. Whereas, like you said, max effort bouts to like express maximal power don't leave any opportunity for pacing or sustaining power. You're not trying to sustain power. You're trying to produce as much power as possible for in most cases, as little time as possible. Where I think that it is problematic is if we were to, I think it would be disingenuous to frame CrossFit as an endurance sport for individuals looking to push the needle forward on their ability to participate in the sport due to the strength requirements to participate. So when we look at like a quarterfinals or a semifinals workout, a really good example, and this hasn't come out quite as much recently, but like the first couple of years of quarterfinals, there were battery tests where it was like there was 15 clean and jerks at 275 for the guys, 185 for the ladies. And there were a lot of people that did very well in the open that year. I saw it at my gym, and they were like, well, I can't even do this workout. And so I think I anticipate that you'll say, well, yeah, because it depends on the individual. But I really think that it's important that people who have the expectation that they will go and be a very competitive functional fitness athlete also understand that it is very important, if not more important, that you are at least strong enough to participate in the sport before it makes any sense to like dedicate a significant amount of time to making yourself as enduring as possible. And I will lean on myself as an example for this right now. I am very fit right now, and I'm not super strong, and I will not make it as far in the quarterfinals or in this towards the semifinal level as I would have like 3 years ago when I was working with Paul, and I could squat 425, 435 at my strongest, right? Like right now I can squat maybe 365, 375, but I can run a 5K at like a 610 pace, right? Like I'm very enduring, I'm very fit. I could probably pull like a 615, 622K right now. Arguably close to the same level as some like elite level CrossFit athletes. Yep. But not being the fact that I'm not strong enough is what's going to limit my ability to even participate with them, right? And so when we are going back and forth in the DMs, that's where, because I do agree with whether or not it's a strength or a endurance sport. It's an endurance sport, but it's an endurance sport for people that are incredibly strong. And when you're trying to develop an athlete to be very competitive, I think that it is extremely important that they are first strong enough to participate, then enduring enough to survive.
Yeah, I think that's where we inherently disagree a little bit, is because in my mind, endurance is the foundation of the sport, and strength is what helps you play it at a higher level. So, to be enduring, to be able to get through a Metcon or be able to get through, Murph or, whatever it may be, having that baseline endurance, and then realizing, oh, like, to be a great quarterfinal athlete or a semifinal athlete, I need to get stronger, right? People don't typically come in to their first couple CrossFit classes and go, oh, I need to get stronger. It's more so, oh, I need to get fitter, right? Or more enduring. Now, do I think that from a development of an athlete standpoint, strength should be the priority like 90% of the time? Yes, but primarily because that takes longer to develop than, endurance would. So one thing I was going to touch on, I just had it in my head. Oh yeah, so let's talk about the quarterfinal test, for example, or even like we can even talk about semifinals last year with the what's the snatch workout that we watched? Isabel.
Yeah.
With Isabel. So for example, someone is strong enough to snatch, let's say 245. Okay, so by default, on paper, with the example that you're saying, if they're strong enough to snatch 245, then they're strong enough to play the sport with Isabel, right, in the semifinal event. However, when you look at someone who is predominantly a strength or a power athlete, look at powerlifting or Olympic weightlifting, right? They're expressing max effort in quick bursts, and then they're resting 10, 15, 20 minutes between efforts. So would you not argue that is, strength endurance to be able to snatch 225 however many times to complete Isabel versus just absolute strength? And I would say the same thing for the clean and jerk box jump workout that you're referencing in quarterfinals. To be able to, yes, someone could, theoretically have a 285 one rep max clean and jerk, but they're still going to get bodied in that workout if they don't have the endurance to sustain those efforts.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the endurance to sustain that power output will, in this instance, for both of those, we're talking about like a snatch or a clean and jerk battery test.
Yeah.
For both of those, they're just going to be like the main driver for that is just going to be their overall 1RM strength, right? Because, a very clear example is like watching Eddie Hall or Dmitry Klokov do those exact workouts and be able to finish them very fast. Like Klokov can probably do Isabel at 225 significantly faster than somebody whose 1RM snatch is, 275, who can run a 20-minute 5K. And it's just because it takes less. He's not even using all his motor units to do the snatch.
Right.
It doesn't take him any effort to do a 225-pound snatch. You could like muscle snatch the first three of them. Same thing with the clean and jerk. People who, you look at people who did well in that workout, and it's like they're just really strong. They're like, and I agree that you have to be like somewhat repeatable, but when the weights are 60, 70, 80% of your 1RM, it's really just your 1RM 1RM goes up, then the repeatability of that goes up. No amount of doing 5K run intervals or mixed modal work is going to change the fact that 275 is 98% of 285. The best way for you to get better at that workout is to make 275 75% and clean and jerk 365.
Mm-hmm. So would you argue that battery work isn't as important as the sport makes it seem to be?
Well, I think that I mean it's all on a spectrum. I think that battery work is important. I think that historically, usually the Open has like, or not the Open, quarterfinals and semifinals have about one battery test. So you're looking at like 20% of the test being some form of a battery test. At the games, I would say you're probably seeing like two or three of them. There's usually a snatch ladder or something, or a clean and jerk ladder, or some form of something where the weights are well over 80% of the average 1RM for the field. I don't want to get too into the weeds on like it's a very specific example, but the example was there to say like there are these like kind of there are these like these gates that you need to be able to pass through, and for you to be able to pass through them, you have to have a certain level of strength in order to even to move forward in competition. Like I just think that like someone who, even if you could teach Klokov how to do double unders and toes to bar and have him do like 19 and 16.2 with the ascending squat clean weights with the double under and toes to bar. And I think that he would do very well on that if you have somebody who is extremely fit, but their 1RM clean is 315. Like Klokov's going to beat him because he can just do the work with less effort. That might be a bad example because I actually don't think that would be the case, because it's more on the battery side that I think that type of athlete gets selected for. I think Klokov would have a hard time breathing and getting through the first 3 rounds of that workout, to be honest with you. But I mean, you look at like he's got like a great time in King Kong, right? I mean, that's a great battery workout, And a lot of the games events aren't super long. A lot of the quarterfinals workouts aren't super long for those types of people. So I just think that strength is more important. But once you're strong enough, it just becomes an endurance game. Yeah. But if you look at someone who's participating in an endurance sport, I think rowing's a really good example. Like a guy who, let's put it this way: do you think that like the world record 2K holder, let's say he's 6 foot, just for the sake of like keeping things consistent, the world record 2K holder on the erg is 6 feet tall. He goes 5:30 on a 2K, like insane speed, right? And then you've got a 90 kilo 90 kilo weightlifter who is like national level. Who do you think it's going to be easier to develop into an elite CrossFitter?
Yeah, I mean, again, going back to what I initially said, I do actually believe that the weightlifter would be easier to develop because they do have those strength prerequisites, but I will pivot and say it is because of how long it actually takes to create a stronger athlete versus a more enduring athlete. So I do think that the length of time is important. I also think that it is more challenging in today's world where everybody is seeing the sexy stuff on Instagram of all the games athletes doing high level gymnastics and handstand walking on ramps and running around a track, and that draws people towards that, and so it's really hard to get people to commit to just doing strength training, right? Like, it doesn't mean you can't
100%.
condition, but it's well known that there is a large interference effect with strength training and aerobic training, and you need proper structure to execute both. And even then, there's trade-off. So I do inherently agree that the weightlifter is going to be easier to turn into an elite CrossFitter. I guess where I would reverb that is, where do you feel like elite CrossFitters fit on the spectrum? Because what I would say is, you look at a 90 kilo weightlifter and then a 90 kilo CrossFitter, I would say that a 90 kilo CrossFitter is further away from national level weightlifting or strength metrics than they are to national level endurance metrics if maybe they lost a little bit of weight as well. So if you look at like Ricky, we'll take Ricky for example. It's actually funny. So the track and field event in 2024, he ran a 455 mile. Mm-hmm. 1RM back squat in 2025, squatted 455. I thought those numbers were funny, 455 and 455. So yeah. when you look at a high level runner in a 1600 meter event, obviously the world record is something outrageous like 347 or something like that. But sub 430 is pretty well recognized as pretty fast, like very fast, right?
Yeah.
When you look at a 90 kilo weightlifter, they're likely squatting close to 600 pounds and snatching close to 400 pounds. So when you look at the delta between the two, do you feel like do you feel like he is closer to elite level endurance metrics, or do you feel like he's closer to elite level strength metrics?
Yeah, it's really hard to tell, obviously. And it's a really hard, I've been thinking about this also, and it's a really hard question to answer because you and I are both familiar with, as you get towards the upper echelon of performance, it gets exponentially harder to push the needle. Like Dylan Cooper said that, like, I think he was like, it takes, it'll take you like 3 years to clean and jerk like 160, and then it'll take you another like 8 years to clean and jerk 200 or something like that, right? Like to get the extra 40 kilo. It's some other numbers, but you know what I'm talking about. And same thing with like running. Like I don't want to discount what it takes to run a sub 5 minute mile, because I probably can't do it right now. But like running, the difference in effort and the amount of training that it takes, I would say is very similar to going from a 5 minute mile to like a 350 mile. Like that's a pretty big, it's a lot of training time and like specification that has to happen for you to get there. Where I think what's more applicable than the mile example is something like a 2K erg or like a 5K bike or something like that on the Echo bike. I think it's more specific to CrossFitters because it allows for a little bit more body weight to be hanging around. It's hard to compare some of that running data just because really the guys who are running elite running metrics are so small that they're not even relevant to the conversation, in my opinion. Like, because it's like, who knows how fast Ricky could run if he was 40 pounds lighter? You know what I mean? Like, how do you I guess you throw a 40-pound weight vest on the world record miler and tell him to go run a mile and see how he does. I don't know. But I do think that it would, for someone like, I want to use like James or Dallin as an example because they're a little bit taller. I do think that they are probably closer to being elite level, like 2K erg or 5K erg on the rowing machine than they are to elite weightlifting numbers.
I would say James in particular.
I mean, I think James was close to getting recruited to row in college and decided not. I could be wrong on that, but I know there have been some CrossFitters who are a little bit taller who have like been recruited or at least tried to get recruited for rowing in college. And people
who haven't used their college eligibility yet as far as athletics go.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that I think they are probably.
Let me pivot on James real quick before I forget. When you look at James, someone who is running Ironmans, someone who is undoubtedly going to do a sub 60 high rocks in the next year.
Sure.
You look at events like those high rocks events. Obviously, sub 60. What is like the top? What do the top guys run?
I think that it's like very good to go sub 60. I'm not sure what the top end are at now. Okay.
You would consider high rocks an endurance sport, right?
I would say so. Yeah.
Okay. So
obviously, much more of a strength sport or endurance sport than it is a strength sport for sure.
Okay. So with that, when you look at James, right, if he was going to go participate in a high rocks versus if he was going to go participate in an Olympic weightlifting competition, I don't think it's arguable that he's going to do better in the high rocks than he is in the weightlifting competition relative to the field, right? So if we're talking, if he was with the Elite 15 versus,
nationals
Lasha,
or whatever, yeah.
He is getting closer to Hunter McIntyre than he is Lasha, right?
Totally.
So, and he is arguably, in my opinion, the best CrossFit athlete in the world. And that could be a debate for a whole other time. But when you look at his consistency over the last season, I think he's earned his stripes as far as top 3, if not top 1 CrossFit athletes.
Sure.
So when you look at the people at the top of the sport, I do think it reflects more closely towards being able to be high level in endurance specific sports versus strength specific sports.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a good observation. I think that James can still snatch close to 300 pounds, clean and jerk 345 to 365, and probably on his best day squat 500. So
yeah,
he's still very, very strong. I think you could also I agree that James is probably one of the upper end in the field, but you could comb through the top 20 of the CrossFit Games athletes and pick 2 or 3 who would be elite, or not elite, but be able to tune up for an Olympic weightlifting meet and be in the complete flip of what you had just described with James and High Rocks, where like Colton Mertens could probably get tuned up to be like a pretty good weightlifter, especially even his size in a lower weight category, and be like absolute garbage at High Rocks, Yeah. And High Rocks is a tall person's event. Like it's better for somebody who's tall. And so, and that's part of what makes the sport interesting is like you can have people like James and Colton competing in the exact same events and having relatively similar outcomes in the overall leaderboard, even though they're completely different athletes. So, but I guess for your example, like I still agree. I think that like endurance is still extremely important, but I still think it's an endurance sport for really strong people. Like James, I think if he's 20% weaker, he's not even a CrossFit Games athlete. And he's still elite in High Rocks, if not better in High Rocks.
Right.
So I just think that like I'm not saying I don't think it's an endurance sport. I do think it's an endurance sport. I think especially what you said at the beginning, where it's like, hey, we're not looking for max effort. We're looking for like sustained power output over time, which is by definition has some form of like enduring attribute to it. But I still think it's really important that people aren't misled in thinking that. I think that it's dangerous to label it as an endurance sport, maybe, or it needs to be taken with some nuance, because to tell people, hey, that you're going to do CrossFit, it's an endurance sport, and then have a bunch of people go out, like you had just described, and do 5K intervals because it's what Jason Hopper and Dre Strom are doing, is not going to serve them if they can't lift the weights that are prescribed in the competitions,
Yeah, I think it's definitely interesting when I look back at like the results on that poll, and I got a lot of votes, like probably close to 100, and just kind of scrolling through the options, right? It did seem like a lot of the people voting for endurance were stronger athletes, and the people voting for strength were
that was the exact. I was going to bring that up. That's the exact result I got also. Like all the people who voted for strength were people who I know are not strong enough to be elite level, and then the people who voted for endurance all had like very good weightlifting numbers or were high level coaches. So
I do think from a let's lean into this a little bit, like from like a periodization of CrossFit, or like CrossFit performance, right? Like take away CrossFit class, and we're talking performance training here. From a periodization standpoint, do you feel like it more resembles an endurance sport or a powerlifting or a strength sport?
Yeah, that's a good question. I wanted to touch on this earlier, but we went in a different direction. I was gonna ask you, do you think it would be fair to say that the overall lifespan of a competitive athlete in the sport of CrossFit is like a majority weightlifting and gymnastics strength related work with some endurance work?
Mm-hmm.
And then the test for, or the events that you compete in, are largely endurance based, which I think is part of where you and I are like, initially when we spoke, and maybe still are like kind of having this like disconnect, is that I agree that the sport itself is an endurance sport, but I think when you train to be very good at it, you have to train more like a strength athlete and spend more of your time training like a strength athlete. Because if you train like an endurance athlete, let's say you want to do 20 hours a week of cardio, no one's eating enough to do 20 hours a week of cardio and push the needle on strength gains.
Right. Yeah, I mean, definitely periodization obviously plays a massive role with, what you're doing in the off season versus what you're doing in, comp prep or actual competition. So, and again, I think it falls back onto what takes longer and what is, more, what you need to be more restrictive of when you're focusing on something. And that's always going to be strength. Obviously strength is, nervous system driven. If your CNS is zapped from doing 30 ring muscle ups in a workout, then it's going to be very hard to even dig deep enough to express the strength needed to make adaptation, right?
Sure.
So I definitely would agree that when I'm training athletes, it is a lot of strength work year round. But I would also say, I think the endurance, quote unquote, will still exist. I think the intensity of the endurance drops in more of an off-season type setting. And preferably, if you can do 2 sessions, we separate those entirely. As you get closer to competition, then you're blending the two. And then that absolute strength work turns into battery or, ladder type work or heavy barbell inside of a chipper. And the intensity comes up, and then that endurance focus really takes precedence. So I think it depends on what people's seasons look like. Like, for example, I coach an 18-year-old girl who's got, a gymnastics background. Because she has a lot of, we say a lot of time, we never really know how much time we have, but, compared to a 30-year-old athlete, she's got a lot of time. It is more important for her to be getting stronger than it is for her to be working endurance. When you have someone who is, say, 33, for example, about to go into age group and has a goal of making the age group games, is her strength good enough for 30, where she's at now? Likely not. So we're going to continue to try to get stronger, but will her strength transfer to, that 35 to 39 age group? Potentially. So I do think it just depends on where you're at in your career and where you're at in your season. Or we can say, okay, we need to do predominantly strength versus endurance.
Yeah. And so to reiterate, I think that in general, and maybe this is biased because of the people that I work with, strength is oftentimes the priority for people. Mm-hmm. And therefore, since it takes a lot longer to develop, and since there's so much interference that comes from doing mixed work and cyclical work, certain types of cyclical work, specifically running, it may seem like the overall training load feels more like a strength and skill sport. Mm-hmm. But I think we both agree that the sport itself is an endurance sport. It requires you to be enduring.
Right.
But and I think obviously that requires a big load of nuance because of what you just said. It's like you're going to periodize training depending on the client's strengths and weaknesses. But in general, somebody's coming to you and they're like a 275 max clean and jerk, 215 max snatch as a guy. You're spending a lot of your time in the off season strength training and maybe doing some gymnastics strength stuff and some skill work. You're touching the engine every once in a while, usually using probably a cyclical modality that's less interfering and has very little eccentric loading. And then as you get closer to competition, you tune it up. And I think another important thing to note is like, it depends on what the client wants, right? Like if they are like, hey, I just want to compete a lot and I'm not trying to be a CrossFit Games athlete. I just want to compete because I have fun competing, and it'll be cool to go from like the RX to the elite level at like a local competition. The training structure is going to look very different for that individual than like somebody who is an 18-year-old that comes to you fresh out of high school and they're like, I want to train full time. I want to be like Emma Lawson. I want to be at the games in 3 years. It's like, okay, we're going to do 18 months of just strength work, and touch the engine every once in a while. And then we're going to like just tune you up like crazy and you'll be good to go. It's going to depend 100% on the individual. Cause you got people that are like, I just want to rip online qualifiers. I want to just suffer. And I don't care about pushing the needle in terms of being a CrossFit Games athlete. I just want to be good and have fun at a local competition. They're going to do a lot more mixed work and not need to dedicate as much time into the strength training. Because I think you and I'll both agree the strength training is like really slow. It takes a long time to develop. And for a lot of CrossFit athletes, I think that it is a really big sacrifice to make in your training because people like to suffer. They like to go in and do hard shit. And when you're like, all right, man, your training is just like 5x5 back squat, Bulgarian split squat, RDL, reverse hypers, core, and you're going to ride the bike for 20 minutes in zone 2 to like just make sure that you don't have a freaking heart attack later. Like, then that's not fun for them. Like, it's not as interesting for them. And you almost have to like, but it's what you have to do if your goal is to like actually make it to a semifinal. If you can only snatch 215 pounds, that's just the way it has to be.
Yeah, I like to dress up bodybuilding as conditioning. So, for example, throw like a 12 or 15 minute AMRAP in there with a damper 10 on the ski. We're going renegade rows. We're going farmers carries. So it's like, we're getting more of a, I guess, bodybuilding-esque, adaptation. But
sure.
It looks like it's an AMRAP, right? So that's a Metcon. Mm-hmm. So, but yeah, I think we're actually agreeing here on one thing. It's like the work is predominantly strength, and then the test is predominantly endurance.
Yeah.
And I think that's when you look at developing an athlete, right? It's like, I think this tells you everything you need to know. Is like when you think about neuromuscular efficiency, for example, someone who has extremely high NME is likely not going to be very good at the sport of CrossFit. Someone who has very low NME is likely not going to be very good at the sport of CrossFit, right? And so you have these two different like extremes on the spectrum, and finding where you need to balance as an athlete in that neuromuscular efficiency spectrum. You're going to be somewhere probably more towards high NME, but not all the way, towards high NME, if that makes sense. So we're going to teeter more towards higher neuromuscular efficiency, but obviously you need to be enduring and sustain, a sustainable athlete as well. So I do think that that elite CrossFit athletes have the genetic potential and ceiling to be way stronger than they actually are expressing in the sport.
I would agree.
Yeah. So like I think if Dallin, for example, quit CrossFit and just, went to lift weights, the dude could probably go compete at, an extremely high level.
You saw that with Craig Ritchie, right? Like, he was never like an elite level CrossFitter by any means, but he was probably upper semifinals, mid semifinals level when he was at his fittest. He seemed like, I don't want to feel like I'm throwing shade at him. He seemed like he had some like competition anxiety or something going on. But when he switched to Olympic weightlifting and stopped doing so much cardio, he got really freaking strong really fast. Like, and I agree. I think that a lot of the CrossFit Games athletes could be a lot stronger. And then I think you also have guys that are like I think James and Brent are examples of guys that are like really enduring and are predispositioned to like be good at something like a high rocks, and they're just like holding on for dear life with their strength work, like trying to just make sure they're strong enough to get through. And like those are their gaps that they're trying to fill. Is like if I can just maintain my, it's like they get the flip flop of what most people need to work on, and they're like, if I can just maintain, or no, they're doing what most people need to be doing. Is like, right. I just maintain my strength and drive strength up a little bit and maintain my engine, I'll be fine. But they can almost make up points elsewhere on the leaderboard due to the fact that they are so engine driven. You know, Sam Briggs and Emily Rolfe, I think, are other good examples of that. Like, they can kind of just get away with it. But again, it's like part of the sport, right? Like, you also got you've got Colton and Guy, who are like more specialized in the weightlifting and shorter time domain stuff. And it depends on what Dave decides, I guess, you know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's interesting, you know, when you look at like Mayhem Classic last year, Colton dusted everybody. And then you look at the games and, you know, he beat guys like James Sprague and Jason Hopper and these guys at the Classic. And then, you know, James Sprague and Jason Hopper on the podium at the games. So programming obviously does play a massive role in people's success. But there was one thing I was going to say. So with like James or Emily Rolfe, or like even you think of like a Danielle Brandon, I do feel like they're going to have more home runs at something like the games than they'll have events that won't be good for them, right? So like, for example, if James can take a bottom quadrant on a strength event, which he's actually climbing closer towards, you know, middle of the pack.
Yeah.
And then if, you know, Danielle can...
or Haley Adams is another really good example.
Yeah, Haley too. Like if they can manage what would, I guess we would call like a good event for them, like in that spectrum, and then they hit these home runs on the things that they're really, really good at. And you see that obviously with Guy and Colton as well. They will hit home runs, but the sport is not programmed, you know, in the way like they're going to hit home runs more than James or Brent.
Totally. Yeah.
Events.
So to summarize what you just said, like being a more enduring athlete will allow you to outperform your competition over a broader range of events. Whereas being a more strength biased athlete, and we're talking relative to the 20 men and women that are competing at the CrossFit Games, being a more strength biased athlete will give you like almost guaranteed home runs, but it will be significantly harder for you to produce good results across the broader spectrum of the entire event.
100%.
I think that's a very succinct way of putting it, and also a very good observation. Because I can't think of an argument against putting it that way. Like that's a pretty cut and dry way of putting it that I think is very true.
Yeah, but I do think at the end of the day, it's like you've got 21, 15, 9, you know, thrusters, bar muscle ups, right? Like what's going to make you better? Is it doing a bunch of thrusters and bar muscle ups, or is it taking your thruster 1RM from, you know, 185 to 255? Like if you're thruster in 255 versus 185 and the working weight is 115, you're going to move through that 115 bar quicker by being stronger.
Yeah.
But then you also need to have that local muscle endurance and that, you know, breathing capacity to be able to actually do those things quickly.
Yeah, and another big one that we haven't even touched on is like at the games or semifinals, you need to be able to do that.
Machines.
Well, you need to be able to do that, and then you need to be able to go eat, recover, and do it again 2 hours later, 3 hours later. Mm-hmm. You know, like, and that is a huge component of the engine that doesn't get expressed necessarily explicitly on the competition floor. It shows up in like trends, I guess, but like dudes who are really enduring and have great aerobic bases will see a lesser deterioration of performance across the course of the weekend or the competition.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you look at someone like James, like the dude is doing every fitness competition there is known to man. And I mean, he's got something special about him where he's able to go and recover and replicate performances, competition after competition after competition. And, that's why I would arguably say he's the best right now, just with his ability to show up and perform. And also from a mental perspective, like the dude just always seems locked in and dialed. Yes, he's goofy. He's, eccentric. He's out there, joking and having a good time. But when it comes to work, I will say spending time with him and Dallin, I would say those guys are two of the best when it comes to just like locking in and just knowing when the time is time to go. I watched those guys do a workout in person. It was 18 wall walks, 36 deadlifts at, I believe, 225, and then 72 wall balls. And I mean, they were done with the wall walks in like almost under a minute. It was ridiculous how fast they were going. But they were just joking around, prior, and then 10, 15 minutes as they're warming up, they just lock in, and then they just do something outrageous like that.
Yeah.
So I do think like being able to stay locked in and do your job separates people from being bottom of the leaderboard to top of the leaderboard. So the other thing I was going to say too is I think people are consistently overtrained in a sense that their true strength is not even able to be expressed. I've had people get a lot stronger just by not doing so much. So they obviously had that strength there. You don't increase your deadlift 40 pounds in, 6 weeks, like, especially at a higher training age, right? So that just is a clear sign that you were being blunted by the amount of intensity you were doing.
Yeah,
and
that as well. It depends on where you are in a training block and in a macro cycle and a mesocycle on how much you're going to dose that intensity versus the strength. But I've also seen it, like, I've done it personally. Like, there was a point in time when I was working with Paul and I stepped away, just did my classes at my affiliate for like 6 or 8 weeks, and I was PRing like everything. And it was just because I was only working out for an hour a day, Mm-hmm. But like, I think there's a misconception there, because I think that happens to people, and then they're like, I need to do like just almost no volume. And it's like, you probably need to do less volume, and that's something that you got to figure out with your coach. But like, you also have to like give credit where credit's due. Like, if you put a ton of work in building like this enormous strength base and you just haven't had the opportunity to express it, and then you take a step back for whatever reason, and coincidentally you just are able to like express all the strength all at once. Mm-hmm. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, it's kind of a weird phenomenon that I've observed, is like, people will be like, you need less volume. I went to doing just 45 minutes a day of training, and look how all these PRs, and it's like, that's probably due to just like a reduction of like CNS fatigue. And you're not gonna, like, a year from now, if you keep training like that, you're not gonna make any appreciable gains. Like,
I think it comes back to like, Celia, who was like the first, obviously to popularize like stress and adaptation, like the stress and adaptation model, right? It's like, if you're getting to a point where you're not stressing your body past what it's known, then there's no adaptation to be had. Yeah. So, for a short term, if you decrease volume or, decrease your weekly load or whatever it may be, you may be able to express strength, but that doesn't mean that you got stronger. It just means, you were able to express the strength you had. But to actually get stronger, you've got to go back into that cave of like, 4x10s and 5x5s And then, that's why we do deloads, and that's why we do tapers. It's like I tell most of my athletes, right? It's like the week before your taper, you're probably going to feel like garbage, and you're probably going to start thinking like, am I even fit enough to go compete? And then after that taper week, you're going to go in feeling the best you've ever felt. And so it's like, it's going to that point of overreaching, pulling it back, and then being able to express the new adaptation that you made. So
okay, let's do a quick segment. 3
quick segment sponsored by
the Coach 'Em Up podcast.
Let's go.
Shout out Tim Riley. If you could give 3 pieces of advice to somebody who is maybe moderate quarterfinal level, let's say 98th percentile in the open, they're good, not outstanding yet. They're
because 98th percentile for male and female is 2 different things.
Let's say male.
Okay.
Most of my listeners are male.
Okay. Most of my athletes are females, so this would be good.
Sure. Yeah. What advice would you give them if they want to take a step towards being a semifinal level athlete? They want to go to a semifinal. They want to start ripping online qualifiers and actually going to compete elite RX or elite at NorCal Classic, Syndicate, those types of events.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be cliche, probably said a lot, but it's you have to identify what is separating you from those people. And very, very seldom is it hard to find. Unless, I would say it's much harder to find separators when you're at the level of, trying to go from 10th in the games to winning the games, right? Like Jason Hopper's example. It's easier to find a limiter when you're trying to go from a high quarterfinals level to making a semifinal. And so having the ability to find that limiter is something that as coaches we pride ourselves on and actually create our business and our coaching around. And so whether that's finding the limiter on your own or whether that's hiring someone who can help you find that limiter, I do think that from a data perspective and just an overall knowledge of the sport, a coach would have better clarity as to where you need to be. But I would say if you're looking to truly level up and get to a different level, you have to find what are the things that they're doing that I'm not doing.
Okay. And then my other question, what is a how do I say this? Pet peeve. What's your fitness pet peeve right now? What's something that you could get on a soapbox and wax poetic about?
That's a good one. Are you phrasing it more as like what athletes do that is my pet peeve as a coach, or just something that I see in the fitness?
Let's do both.
Space?
Let's do both.
I would say like I've always, and like I've been guilty of this too as an athlete. A smart person and a great athlete told me, you can't complain when you don't get the results you never worked for in the first place. So it's like you cannot complain about not qualifying for the games if you weren't putting in games level work and games level compliance, right? So I think that's something I try to remind people is if you were 100% compliant, if you followed everything to the T, if you were dialed nutritionally, if you were sleeping 8 hours a night, if you were hydrating, and stuff doesn't work, then it's my fault, 100% my fault, and I'll own that. But if we're talking 80% compliance, if we're talking going to bed at 2 a.m., if we're talking, not hydrating, eating crap, then I'm not going to necessarily take the fall for that because this is like a mutual relationship here. Like there has to be buy-in from both sides. And if I care more than you do, like that's a problem. So I would say biggest pet peeve right now is at times feeling like I'm caring more about progress than the athlete. And maybe that comes back to setting clear expectations. But if someone, my mentor always tells me like the root of all anger is unmet expectations. And so it's like setting those clear expectations that, okay, but if you tell me this is what you want and you're not following through on your end, I'm going to remind you that, hey, remember when you said this, like that you wanted to make semifinals, but, you know, you're joking around with, you know, your workouts, then we're not in alignment. So that was a long-winded way of saying just like, I think the buy-in that people need, I think they underestimate. And then as an athlete just in the fitness space, oh man, I would say this might get me heat, but one of my biggest pet peeves is when people call class workouts training. And that frustrates me just because to me, training and exercise or training and working out are two completely different things. I showed up to the weight room in like my sophomore year of high school, and they had just brought in this Olympic weightlifting coach who had a lot of credibility. And, you know, I walked in there first day. He's like, you know, what are you here for? Because I'm pretty sure I joined like the workouts like 2 weeks late or something like that. And he's like, what are you here for? I said, I'm here to work out. Kick me out. And I didn't understand. Like, I just couldn't grasp like why saying I'm here to work out was such a bad thing. But he wanted me to tell him that I was there to train. And I think it goes back to Mark Ripeto's book, The Practical Programming for Strength Training, and he talks about it a lot. The difference between working out and training, or exercising and training. Training is having a clear goal in your mind and putting a actual structured plan together to go accomplish that goal. So without that, then you're really just working out. You're just sweating. So I would say like that's a pet peeve of mine, is like let's delineate between the two. And I by no means think anybody is saying that maliciously, by the way. But I do think that there's a difference.
Yeah, training is a means to an end in an athletic endeavor, and working out is something you do for health and well-being. And
yeah,
there is a little bit of overlap, but I think it's more like part of the workout overlaps with training, but it doesn't really go the other way.
I do agree. I think working out, exercising is more so for feeling good in the moment, and training is more so for that long-term adaptation, or long-term, I want this 3 years from now, so I'm going to do this today, versus, I want to feel good, so I'm going to go sweat. Now, can doing something that you're doing for 3 years down the road be gratifying in the moment? Like, for sure. And I think that's what appeals people to CrossFit so much, is it's novel and it's, it's communal, and there's joy and shared suffering. But at the end of the day, it's like, are you working towards a means to an end, like you mentioned, or are you just trying to make it through your hour-long class and then it's on to the next one?
I think that for me, one thing that I want to mention is you had talked about how you're like, if I have a client and they are 100% compliant in exercise and lifestyle, then I'll take the blame. I think there is also a certain element of that is out of everybody's control. And
for sure.
One thing I will say that I grappled with a lot as an athlete, but then have been able to convey to my clients now as a coach, is that if you are 100% compliant, if you've done everything that needs to be done, and you don't get the result that you wanted, even like I think that it's okay, like you might feel like you want to place blame one place or another, but you can also find comfort in knowing that you did everything that you were supposed to do. Mm-hmm. And you can walk away from competition without feeling any regrets, and at the very least having had learned something.
For sure.
And there are I feel like a good coach will always walk away from a competition with an athlete and think to themselves, we could have done this differently, we could have prepared for this differently, we could have done this or managed this, blah 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 blah. But as an athlete, it can be really challenging to grapple with those emotions, and having the the wherewithal to recognize that, like, if you did everything during your preparation for whatever it may be, and you were honest with yourself, then there is a certain level of freedom that you have when the results present themselves. Because if you went out and then you executed and you did everything you had to for your preparation, then to a certain extent, the result is out of your control, and at the mercy of how prepared or how fit the other individuals were, or what the programming was. And those are things that you're never going to be able to control. And so
Sure.
you can find comfort in knowing that you were able to at least hold up your end of the bargain, as it relates to
Yeah,
your competition.
100% agree. I mean, not every strength cycle is going to work. Not every skill, cycle is going to work. Genetic potential and genetic disposition is a very real thing. Especially the higher in your training age you get, it becomes more real. Aging is a real thing. So not everything's going to work all the time. Another shout out Jake Foster, because he's like, all of the Fosterisms are going on in my head right now. But it's like, one thing he says is, you're always going to wonder what if, right? But you have to decide what you'd rather wonder what if about or more, for example. So what if I'm 100% compliant and this doesn't work, versus, well, what if I'm 70% compliant and if I was 100, it would have really worked.
Right.
So it's like, I would rather rest in knowing that I did everything I could, and
Exactly.
Left it all in the field or on the competition floor in this sense, and failed. So yeah, I agree with that 100%.
All right, before we get off, who is your favorite driver? What team are you rooting for this year?
We're talking NASCAR, or we're talking Formula One?
Formula One.
So I am more of a NASCAR guy personally. So I used to work in sports, and for most of my career up to this point, and I was at the F1 event in Austin at COTA.
Nice.
There, I really like Lando. I think Lando's a good guy. I like Verstappen, but he's kind of like the Tia Toomey of F1. Like, I just get tired of seeing them win, and it's not because I don't like them. I think they're great people and great, obviously, the GOATs in a sense. But it's like, I want somebody else to win, So I go for Lando in F1. As far as NASCAR goes, do you know anything about NASCAR? No. Okay. Well, I'm a Chevy guy, so that's who I pull for NASCAR wise.
Nice. I'm a big Verstappen guy.
Okay.
I like Max. I like how he seems like a cold-blooded killer, and I like that energy.
Yeah, I like the crossover between Red Bull. Like, I think Red Bull is, because Verstappen's a big Red Bull guy, right? Yeah. So the crossover into CrossFit, with Red Bull being more prevalent, there's some synergy there.
Yeah. Okay, Jack. Well, thanks for coming on the podcast. I will. I'll link all of Jack's stuff in the description, so you'll be able to find him and find his information there. And then we'll catch you guys in the next one.